response to the uprisings? Should it be doing more in Yemen, Syria and Libya? It's already run into trouble on Bahrain. EU foreign ministers urged Bahrain's security forces not to use violence against demonstrators, but they also went on to urge demonstrators, and I quote here, quote, not to use deliberately intimidating actions. And there was no mention of the Saudi forces brought in to try to quell the uprising. Curious instructions, it would seem, to people who are fighting for their rights. Anyway, with me now is Edward McMillan-Scott, who is the Vice-President of the European Parliament, responsible particularly, very relevant to this subject, responsible for democracy and human rights. Welcome, very good to have you with us.
Good to be here, sir.
Terrific. We were talking there about the reaction. You were really appalled by the thing that I just reported there. Not when I said it then, but when it actually happened.
When it actually happened. And then it was made worse, because Cathy Ashton, she's the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, one of her senior advisors went on the next day to say that the forces in Bahrain were right to restore law and order. And a quite bizarre approach.
Yeah.
And if you'd said something like that...
This is Robert Cooper, yes?
Robert Cooper, indeed. British diplomat. He should know better. I mean, had that sort of remark been made during the revolution in Egypt, Mubarak would have seized it with both hands. Yeah. And it's giving quite the wrong message.
And he said accidents happen.
That sort of thing, yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, this business-as-usual approach really has to stop. The European Union is supposed to stand up for human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and that's the watchword of its foreign policy. But, you know, when these things come out, it looks a bit as if, as I say, it's business as usual and not supporting the reform process, which is what we should be doing. And, you know, I was twice in Cairo in the last month talking to those who were demonstrating, who are now looking forward to freedom and democracy and the rule of law, which they've never tasted before. And it's a remarkable thing going on there and in Tunisia, elsewhere in the region. Of course, Libya is still to be sorted out. But for the EU not to support the process of reform is a grave mistake.
It looks as a situation where you've got Britain being first in doing one thing, France being first in doing something else. It looks as though the role of the EU has been fading, and individual countries are going back to doing their own act.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then in the European Parliament, we've been absolutely appalled at this lack of leadership by the EU. That Brussels is sort of fading away from the scene, as you say. But this is our neighbourhood. It's not an American neighbourhood, and yet they're there. They're there politically. They're there militarily. They're there financially. You know, Europe is not just for humanitarian aid. It does stand for values, and we should be standing up for those values and not simply saying we're going to send in aid to Libya once it's, you know, safe to do so. That, to my mind, is a rather pathetic response. Europe should not be pathetic.
So what else can be done?
Well, I think the first thing...
What would you urge
I would have expected...
that's not being done at the moment that should be done?
I met, a month ago, Mr. Jibril, who is now the sort of acting Prime Minister of the opposition in Libya. That interim council should have been recognised by the EU as an interlocutor, and in a formal way, weeks ago, and it would have given a massively important signal to the regime in Tripoli. We should be obviously accelerating humanitarian aid, but we should also be facilitating, in my view, the supply of arms to the so-called rebels, the people who are trying to reform in Libya, because it's quite clear that they are militarily under-resourced. They have nobody with massive training experience, and it's needed now to push the forces back towards Tripoli, as was going on the other day. We need external help.
No, but there will be people who say in that situation that's going too far, that basically, while believing in human rights and so on, that the EU should be more neutral in these situations. You're saying it should not be neutral.
No, we can't be neutral. Certainly not. Not when Gaddafi is killing his own people. That's the crucial test, and the International Criminal Court is waiting for him. But in the meantime, we need to make sure that rebellion, if you like, is successful, and we can only do that by actually providing the material with which they can win. And this should be available. Obviously, not European soldiers on the ground. As Mr. Jibril said, you know, it's got to be a Libyan pen that writes Libyan history. And he wants no involvement by troops, but the material to win the rebellion must be supplied by the European Union, and if not, by individual nations, with the support of of course, of the Arab neighbours.
Yeah, absolutely. Edward, thank you very much indeed for being with us. And we're going to take a break.